2 more holidays passed. Although there were some issues, mainly due to the girls who all wanted to flock to Raven, it was generally a joyful and peaceful time. On the morning of the 4th day, an event that would become a turning point occurred. Count Seyrod, the governor of Leus, invited the prince, the princess, and the Pendragon family to a social gathering. Raven and Ian had been expecting the invitation for days, so they accepted it nonchalantly. The 4 women were all very excited, though they showed it in different ways. Lindsay and Irene were the most giddy. Lindsay's feelings were a mix of excitement and anxiety, while Irene saw it as an opportunity to elevate the Pendragon family's name at her first social gathering. Ingrid and Luna, on the other hand, did not show their anticipation outwardly. Inwardly, Ingrid saw this as a good chance to recover the points she had lost in Raven's eyes and to practice for her future role as the Duchess Pendragon. Luna, as usual, just quietly agreed to the invitation, secretly hoping for a chance to raise her own standing. Raven stared coldly at the invitation on the table. The time and place were clear. His eyes were filled with vigilance and caution. Here it is, our chance. Ian glanced at Raven's serious expression and easily understood his implication. He shot a glance at him with a cunning smile. Now, we just have to play along with what he wants, right? Within the Pendragon family, only one person felt uneasy about Seyrod's invitation. Helen stood stunned, her face crestfallen, her lips endlessly murmuring in worry. Count Seyrod. Raven quickly noticed Helen's terrible complexion. He had been told about the history between the Duchess and Count Seyrod, so he understood that this social event would make her uncomfortable. Raven spoke gently, shattering the stone that weighed on Helen's heart. Ah, Mother, please stay here and rest tonight. Raven smiled softly, trying to offer a reason to ease Helen's anxiety. There might be a lot of things happening at the party. It would be very tiring for you to attend. Helen let out a sigh of relief and returned Raven's gentle smile. Thank you, my son, Aaron. Then, Raven stood up and looked towards Soldrake, who was sitting on the roof enjoying the breeze. As soon as she heard him call her name, she immediately looked down with curious eyes. Raven spoke seriously to Soldrake with eyes full of trust. Take care of my mother. No, I entrust the Duchess to you. Soldrake simply gazed at Raven without a word. The White Dragon had no obligation to protect anyone from the Pendragon family except for her contractor. But seeing Raven's direct and serious request, Soldrake understood it would be a long night and couldn't bring herself to refuse him. As the evening sun began to touch the glittering golden sea, dozens of nobles who had received invitations to the banquet had gathered at the residence of Governor Leus. The nobles knew that the imperial family and the young Duke Pendragon would be present. This wasn't surprising, but their faces still showed excitement, as meeting the official heir of a duchy and the royal family was not an everyday occurrence. Dozens of people waited in the mansion's courtyard with eager faces. They cheered as soon as they saw the most distinguished guests of the party arrive. Oh, what an honor to have them visit. The main characters of today's gathering have arrived. A procession of carriages entered the courtyard, with 2 prominent yellow and red flags fluttering above. On each flag was the crest of the imperial family and the Duchy of Pendragon. Following the carriages were about 20 attendants and 30 soldiers in formal uniforms, displaying the prestige of their masters. The carriage doors opened, and the group stepped out one by one. Raven coldly scanned the crowd of nobles who were eagerly running closer to greet them. Ian silently nodded with a solemn expression. Irene and Lindsay, attending their first outside party, couldn't hide their mix of excitement and bewilderment. Meanwhile, Ingrid and Luna greeted all the nobles with calm smiles on their faces. The nobles' faces brightened upon seeing the smiles of the beautiful princess and the Lady of Seyrod. Praises echoed endlessly for their noble and elegant demeanor. The first public appearance of Prince Ian and young Duke Raven together also made all the nobles marvel. This indirectly became a confirmation of the mutually supportive relationship between a potential candidate for the imperial throne and one of the 5 largest duchies in the empire. The nobles quickly surrounded the special group of guests. Your attitudes are so gracious and friendly, even for us nobles. This is an honor we do not deserve. This is our first time meeting the young lord, but... Suddenly, Karuta's roar cut through all the lively conversations. Hey, Pendragon! Everyone recoiled in shock as Karuta emerged from the Pendragon family carriage. He grumbled as his first step shattered the thin paving stones of the residence's courtyard. This is completely different from what you told me. Raven calmly turned his head, as if he had anticipated this reaction from Karuta. The young ladies who had just surrounded Raven immediately backed away 8 feet, anxiety clear on their faces. They felt threatened by the appearance of the massive monster. Even though Ancona warriors often appeared in Leus, no noble party had ever included them. Ignoring all the fearful eyes on him, Karuta, as tall as the mansion's decorative stone statues and wearing the characteristic white cloak of Pendragon, continued to shout in frustration. What the hell is this? It's just a bunch of stuffed pigs here! Isla, also in a white suit, got out of the carriage right after him, but he seemed to have no intention of stopping Karuta's rampage. Aren't they just puny insects? Although Isla said nothing, His gaze towards the Seirod Knights showed he thought similarly to Karuta. Still enraged, Karuta continued to scream, "You said something would happen, so I came all this way excited. But where are the warriors worth my time? I want to beat those roan bastards to a pulp." The more Karuta spoke, the more agitated he became. Raven didn't even have a chance to explain as Karuta yelled straight into his face in the middle of the crowd. Just then, an unusually calm voice rang out. "Thank you all for coming. Prince, Princess, Pendragon, and companions." Karuta immediately fell silent, and the entire group turned their heads upon hearing the calm voice call their names. They were surprised that someone could still speak so calmly after seeing Karuta. The owner of the calm voice was John Vincent, dressed in black from head to toe, with a finely crafted sword at his hip, the symbol of a Seirod Knight. His hair was neatly combed back, and his physique was nearly equal to Raven's. Raven was surprised when John Vincent approached him to greet him first, instead of the second prince. "I am a knight serving under Governor Seirod. My name is John Vincent." John Vincent bowed politely with one hand on his chest and the other on the hilt of his sword, the traditional salute for knights. "It is a great honor to meet you all, young Lord Pendragon." Immediately after, John Vincent opened his eyes and looked up at Raven, a provocative glint clearly visible in his amber irises. Raven silently observed John Vincent. As their eyes met, Raven immediately noticed the spark of madness flashing in John Vincent's eyes. Raven was momentarily stunned. That's the flow of aura." Raven cautiously scanned John Vincent's eyes again. The flow of aura only appeared in those who were seasoned warriors with vast battlefield experience. A normal person might freeze on the spot if they looked into those eyes. Then a faint, mysterious smile crossed Raven's lips. He thought to himself, "Interesting. Let's just observe the situation for a little longer." Normally Raven wouldn't let something like this slide, but this time he tilted his head and turned away as if intimidated. Thus, a ridiculous situation unfolded in front of the Count's residence. The heir of a duchy had to avert his gaze from a knight out of fear. However, John Vincent's cold expression did not change. He simply withdrew the killing intent from his eyes. Raven glanced at John Vincent, his head still turned away. John Vincent's calm demeanor indicated he was truly powerful. Combined with his ability to wield a hostile aura, the difference between him and other knights was immense. Raven knew he had to be more vigilant of John Vincent. Meanwhile, John Vincent acted as if nothing had happened and continued to speak to the esteemed guests in a cordial tone. "Well then, everyone, please follow me." The large doors to the residence swung open, and John Vincent led the group. Although the mansion was as vast and extravagant as one would expect from a governor, the group was accustomed to the luxurious halls of the Imperial Palace and Conrad Castle. They calmly followed John Vincent through the corridors leading to the banquet hall. The men in the group all focused on carefully observing John Vincent's gait, and a similar assessment arose in all their minds. John Vincent's steps were always steady, and his posture was perfectly composed as he walked. Any sharp swordsman could tell he was trained to draw his sword in an instant. Among the men, Karuta was the most excited upon recognizing John Vincent's professionalism. Perhaps he could be an opponent for me. Isla, on the other hand, stared at the back of John Vincent's neck with extreme caution. He seemed to have already decided that if a bad situation were to arise, John Vincent would undoubtedly be his opponent. Soon, the group arrived before the banquet hall, from which magnificent music flowed. Under the brilliant light of a chandelier that illuminated the vast room, the gazes of everyone standing in the hall turned towards the wide-open doors where the party's most noble guests were entering. After a brief moment of silence, as the eyes of nearly 100 nobles focused on the group, a grand introduction rang out. "The blood of Argon, the great golden lion who rules the empire with wisdom and courage. Prince Ian Argon and Princess Ingrid Argon have arrived. The Lord of the White Dragon, who embodies fiery courage and elegant passion. Lord Aaron Pendragon and Lady Irene Pendragon of the Pendragon Duchy have arrived." After the esteemed guests had walked to the middle of the hall, a short, middle-aged man stepped before them. He wore a long, thin blue coat with white trim, held a cane in one hand, and had a large, sparkling jewel affixed to his cravat. Seirod smiled warmly, causing his wrinkles to deepen, and bowed to the guests standing before him. "I am the governor of Laos, Torio Seirod." "It has been a long time, hasn't it, Prince Ian?" Ian responded to the greeting with a radiant smile and chatted naturally. "I believe it's been about 3 years. I always wanted to visit, but as you know, there is much to do in the Imperial Palace." Seirod then leaned towards Ingrid and bowed with a familiar gesture. "And you, Princess Ingrid, it has been 5 years, hasn't it?" Ingrid politely bowed in return with a graceful half-smile. For a moment, Seirod's cunning eyes scanned Ingrid's entire body. He continued in a courtly manner. "You have become even more beautiful." Raven was startled to see his cunning eyes look over Ingrid's body like a filthy old lecher, but it seemed Ian and Ingrid were unaware of this fact. Immediately after, Seirod turned to Irene with the same constant fake smile on his face. "And this must be Lady Irene? You have become so beautiful." Irene naively nodded and smiled back at him. In the moment he faced Irene, Seyrod's hawkish eyes also swept over her body, the greedy, covetous eyes of a predator. Raven quietly glanced at Seyrod and once again saw the thirst in his eyes. His intuition screamed that this old man was a venomous snake. Finally, Seyrod greeted Raven with the same commercial smile and effusive actions. "And now, the center of current attention, young Lord Pendragon." Seyrod showered Raven with praise. "You made a contract with the White Dragon and made both orcs and beast tamers follow your word. The future of the Pendragon family is truly bright." At that moment, Raven and Seyrod exchanged glances. He felt the hatred and hostility in the old man's eyes for a split second. Then the man quickly concealed his animosity and asked Raven, "But, may I ask, where's the Duchess?" Raven recalled Seyrod's greedy gaze as he looked at Ingrid and Irene. Look at this old bastard. He spares neither the young nor the old." He clicked his tongue, suppressing his irritation, and replied in a calm voice. "Her condition is not well, so she is resting at the villa with my other sister." Seyrod feigned extreme concern for Helen. He said, almost shouting, "That is terrible! I will send my personal physician to treat her." He offered eagerly, "Naturally, I will also visit her myself." But Raven bluntly shook his head in refusal. "I am grateful for your kind intentions, but please do not. I do not think you need to worry about the Duchess's health or the future of my family." Not wanting to see the man's fake smile any longer, Raven began to speak in a cold, suggestive tone. "Besides, if some unexpected, dangerous situation were to arise, it would be very troublesome for you." Seyrod swallowed nervously. He felt a pang of guilt, but the killing intent in his eyes as he looked at Raven's cold face did not change. Seyrod automatically stepped back with an even friendlier smile. "Is that so? Well then, I hope you all enjoy yourselves to the fullest tonight." Ian responded to Seyrod, who was standing in the middle of the banquet hall, with a wide grin while whispering to Raven, "What a disgusting bastard, right? Like a venomous snake." Raven, still annoyed by Seyrod's lustful gaze towards the girls, replied curtly, "Yeah." After a moment of silence, Raven clicked his tongue and continued in a disdainful tone. "I heard that a long time ago. He proposed to the Duchess and was rejected. It's been 20 years, yet he's still so obsessed." Not wanting to speak more about the Duchess's private affairs, Raven glanced at Ian while changing the subject. "By the way, that knight, Vincent, he doesn't seem like an ordinary knight. Who the hell is he?" Ian pondered for a moment, then said, "I heard he is the subordinate Count Seyrod trusts the most. He came to Laos 2 years ago and quickly rose to prominence." Ian added in a low voice, "Rumor has it he's the one who does the dirty work for Count Seyrod, even though he looks quite normal on the outside." Raven tilted his head at Ian. "Dirty work?" Raven fell into deep thought. Could he be related to the incident in Cisac? Ian raised his glass as if to say goodbye, preparing to step into the bustling center of the hall. "That's all the clues I have. Now, let's enjoy the party. Don't drink too much." Raven smirked and replied sarcastically, "I should be the one saying that." Inside the hall, the second prince of the empire, known as a scoundrel and the king of high society, was attracting noble men and women who approached him from all directions. They were unaware that outside the residence, a group of people had just been stopped by Count Seyrod's soldiers, who were shouting with stuttering voices. Why are you here in that attire? Why have you come here?" the soldier asked, trembling like a leaf as he pointed his spear at a man twice his size. The large man bared his characteristic teeth and laughed with a mocking tone. "I heard there was going to be a party, so of course I had to dress up." Taleo chuckled and spoke, holding up a single finger in front of the soldier, who was still fearfully raising his spear high. The next second, before the soldier could even process Taleo's identity, something sliced across his throat. The attack was so fast, he couldn't even make a sound. Blood spurted from his mouth, and the soldier's eyes rolled back in dead silence. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide and white. Taleo casually flicked the blood from his finger onto the soldier's body and declared, "This is my favorite outfit, and I am dressed appropriately for the occasion." Taleo laughed heartily, showing off his truly neat attire, but his outfit was exactly that of a genuine pirate. Even though the Aries family was associated with the sea, this style of dress was still inappropriate for his status. After dealing with the weak gate guards of the Seyrod family, Taleo and Paku charged straight towards the mansion doors with eager expressions and savage laughter. "Now then, let's party hard!" Inside the banquet hall, Seyrod was quietly observing Raven from a distance and said with a sarcastic tone, "He's quite a reckless brat for his age, that Aaron Pendragon." In a secret room on the second floor above the banquet hall, Seyrod laughed as he conversed with his trusted subordinate. "Don't you think so, Sir Vincent?" From the secret room, the entire banquet hall below could be seen through a pane of glass. It was made of a special material that, from the outside, looked like nothing more than a giant mirror. John Vincent lightly swirled the wine in his glass and assessed with a cautious tone. A worm, or at best, a snake. When I released my flow of aura, he could see it. However, he quickly looked away. It seems he was frightened. Seyrod laughed gleefully and nodded at the words of his trusted, intelligent, and calm subordinate. Basically, he's just a puny little insect. John Vincent pondered for a moment and continued without hesitation. However, that Giano Knight, there's no doubt he is very strong. Seyrod tilted his head curiously and asked John Vincent, compared to you, what is his level? John Vincent slowly raised his wine glass, savoring its aroma, and replied calmly, I do not know. Only a real fight will tell. John Vincent paused as the glass neared his mouth, delving into his thoughts. A brief silence filled the room. John Vincent thought carefully about Isla. That must be a Van Vass Knight. Those foolish and reckless warriors who persistently swing their swords even when their arms are severed and their throats are pierced. The more he thought, the more John Vincent wondered. There's no reason for a Van Vass warrior to serve under such a weak worm. Seyrod narrowed his eyes sinisterly. He had heard about the orc and beast tamer warriors, but never about a powerful knight following Raven. But he didn't seem fazed, telling John Vincent, Then I will leave that knight to you. If you can't kill him, it doesn't matter because our reinforcements will arrive soon. Seyrod let out a malicious laugh unbecoming of his status. The son of the Sea Dragon King, the Black King. He'll take care of this cat and snake, won't he? Seyrod grinned wickedly, looking at John Vincent with a curious gaze once more. You met him in that filthy place, didn't you? The Black King. His question immediately made John Vincent recall his meeting with Toleo a few days ago, and the feeling of terror when facing the killing intent radiating from him. Not to mention that terrifying aura, his towering physique, twice the size of a normal man, and all his muscles as hard as rock upon touch were enough to stun any ordinary opponent. Cold sweat unconsciously beaded on John Vincent's face. The brief encounter with Toleo could be considered one of the rare times he had faced someone who made him feel suffocated. Whenever he thought of it, John Vincent's pupils wavered slightly. He immediately put down his wine glass, feeling uneasy. He's a monster. No one can defeat him. At least no human can. Seyrod bared his teeth in a sinister grin, his cunning eyes darting around. If someone like you says so, then everything will proceed according to plan. Seyrod praised John Vincent, despite the fact that he seemed indifferent to such platitudes. Of all the people I know, you are the most intelligent and skilled in combat. I have never seen anyone better than you with a blade, be it soldiers or mercenaries. Seyrod couldn't stop chuckling as he imagined his victory. If today's events go smoothly, our plans will be expanded and accelerated even further. And when that time comes, I will give you the position you've been dying for. John Vincent bowed politely and replied, I am not worthy of such an honor, my lord. Seyrod's bloodshot eyes turned towards the giant glass, looking down at the banquet hall below. He said with a carefree air, Even if we fail, it doesn't matter. I will not be blamed for anything that happens here. Seyrod abruptly changed to a pitiful tone, but a cunning smile played on his lips. I am simply a victim. He looked down at the most beautiful women in the banquet hall, chatting carefree, and continued to act the part of a pitiful victim. I'm just like those carefree fools indulging in the party down there. Seyrod's tone changed again immediately. He turned his head and glanced at John Vincent. His face wrinkled into a distorted smile and asked in a sly tone, Isn't that right? John Vincent calmly took a sip of wine. He was all too familiar with Seyrod's rapidly changing expressions and tones. The man had a rich and cunning range of expressions, a stark contrast to his own perpetually stoic face. But John Vincent didn't care much, as long as he achieved his goal. After a few seconds of silence, John Vincent slowly opened his mouth. Yes, my lord. The people in the banquet hall below knew nothing of the impending danger and continued to immerse themselves in the joy of the grand party, which was on a different level from other nobles' gatherings, as the Seyrod family was considered one of the most prominent noble families in the entire empire, second only to the 5 ducal families and the royal family. As night fell outside the residence, a series of loud noises echoed, the sound of shattering glass and wood breaking the lively atmosphere of the party. As soon as the mansion's windows were smashed, a few shrill screams rang out. Everyone was stunned and stopped what they were doing. Their eyes immediately turned towards the source of the noise. Toleo, Paku, and a horde of roan pirates stormed into the banquet hall through the newly shattered glass windows. People began to scream loudly, and chaos ensued. Run! It's the pirates! Toleo, leading the roan pirates, leaped down into the hall from a balcony 5 meters above the ground floor. He swung his cutlass and charged straight at the nobles who were still frozen in panic. Intermingled screams echoed throughout the mansion as sharp blades flashed, slashing through the air. Blood splattered everywhere. Toleo's cold, sharp blade cut through everyone, regardless of their gender or status. The bloody massacre unfolded in a flash, causing people to trample over each other in fear as they fled. However, no matter how fast they tried to escape, it was difficult to evade Teleo's 2-meter-long arms. They not only became victims of his blade, but were also tossed into the air like toys. Teleo radiated his killing intent with a savage laugh.
Kill all these insects. Take their wealth and enjoy the women to your heart's content.
The roan pirates, without waiting for Teleo's command, had already begun to bite, tear, and plunder. They ravaged every place they passed, bathing the entire party in a thick sea of blood. Sirod, witnessing everything from the secret room, stared wide-eyed in astonishment. Feeling disgusted, he immediately covered his mouth to suppress the nausea rising in his throat. Swallowing down the repulsive feeling, Sirod clicked his tongue and lamented to John Vincent. He went a little too far. It's going to be hard to clean up the bloodstains later. While Sirod was worrying about the cleanliness of his mansion, John Vincent let out an amused laugh. He did well. Because he's gone this far, no one will suspect a thing, my lord. John Vincent grinned cunningly and began to mess up his neatly combed hair. Well then, I suppose it's time for me to start my work. Meanwhile, down in the banquet hall, the sound of high heels repeatedly clicked on the floor as the princess and the ladies of Pendragon fled from the pirates. The 4 girls ran frantically, screaming for Raven and Ian, but it seemed their weak cries couldn't be heard over the terrified screams of the nobles echoing throughout the building. As the 4 girls were running up to the 2nd floor to escape the pirates' pursuit, Teleo suddenly leaped in front of them, blocking their path. He was 4 meters tall with abnormally long limbs, looking inhuman with his hideous appearance. He narrowed his eyes at the girls and said in a tone like a cat toying with a mouse, "Found you." Immediately after, he released his terrifying aura, aiming it at the girls' fragile, delicate souls. As expected, the 4 girls froze instantly before Teleo's terrifying killing intent. Their trembling legs were helplessly unable to move an inch. The immense pressure weighed on their chests, choking their screams in their throats. Teleo narrowed his eyes in amusement, scanning each girl from head to toe. He pointed his finger at their faces, then moved his covetous gaze from one to another. A slow, metallic rasping sound came from his throat, each sound like a needle shot through his sharp teeth. Who should I eat first? Wherever Teleo's cold finger and gaze moved, the girls felt their hearts stop. Their already shallow breaths became even more difficult. Even though the girls had all witnessed the oppressive auras of rulers and the White Dragon, they still couldn't withstand the terrifying pressure generated by Teleo's every gesture. Luna gasped in terror as her heart felt like it was being squeezed. I can't breathe. This is just like that time. Subconsciously, she recalled the scene at the edge of the Ancona forest when they first faced the Ancona orc warriors. Is this feeling like the fear of orcs? While Luna was lost in her terrifying memory of the Ancona warriors, Teleo's finger stopped. Whether it was due to Luna's charm and her still beautiful frightened face, or because of her dazed expression as she thought of the orc warriors instead of looking at him in panic, he decided to point his finger at Luna's face with a wicked grin. I choose you. Right after his declaration, Teleo raised his cutlass high and let out a savage laugh. Luna no longer had the strength to lift her legs and run. She could only shut her eyes tightly and cover her head with her hands, silently praying that Raven would appear once again, just as he did when she was threatened by the Ancona orc warriors. The moment Teleo's cutlass swung down, the sound of clashing metal rang out. Raven had appeared just in time, blocking Teleo's sharp blade with 2 crossed swords. Teleo was slightly surprised that the person who appeared was Raven, not Ian. He held a long sword in one hand and a thin sword, the preferred weapon of mercenaries, in the other. It was strange for the heir of a great noble family of the Empire to be dual-wielding swords like this. The girls were overjoyed to see Raven appear. They almost forgot the bloody scenes they had just witnessed and the terrifying fear they had experienced only moments before. In the tense silence, Teleo continued to press his blade down, forcing Raven to strain to hold his ground. As iron met iron, sparks flew into the air. Even while focused on the fight, Raven managed to glance at the trembling Luna, who had collapsed on the floor, and asked in a gentle tone, Are you all right, Miss Sirod? Though it was a normal question he would ask any of the girls in this situation, Luna's heart fluttered, her moved eyes glistening with tears. Teleo smirked, looking at Raven with a cunning gaze. The fools took the bait and showed their faces without thinking. Just then, Ian stepped forward from the stairs behind Teleo and said in a mocking tone, No matter how closely I observe, you still just look like a giant pig. Ian stood proudly on the 2nd floor, looking down at Teleo with a contemptuous gaze. He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword with an arrogant smile. Did you think you only had one opponent? At that moment, Isla and Karuta came up the stairs from the 1st floor. They formed a pincer formation, trapping Teleo in the narrow hallway. Karuta let out a gleeful chuckle, carrying an axe twice the size of his arm. So, this is what you meant when you said something would happen? Things are finally getting interesting. Taleo became confused, looking from Ian to Karuta and Isla. The appearance of 4 strong opponents at once left him flustered. He darted his eyes from side to side in surprise, but there was absolutely no hint of fear or worry in them. Am I the one who's trapped? Raven and Ian smiled smugly, seeing the hunter become the prey. However, their smiles quickly vanished when Taleo suddenly bared his teeth in an amused grin. Taleo lowered his sword and burst out laughing in a mocking tone.
Is that so? Ha 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 ha! But the thoughts of you fools are far too childish.
Raven had to flinch and step back from the terrifying killing intent radiating from him. Taleo grinned widely, his pupils burning like fire. He raised his cutlass before Raven with a challenging look. No matter how many insects you gather, you will never be able to defeat me. A tense silence followed after Taleo's savage laughter ceased. The smile on Raven's lips had vanished, replaced by high alert as he realized his opponent did not have the aura of a human at all. Isla had a similar feeling to Raven and did not show any contempt for the enemy. But in contrast, the arrogant and competitive Ian and Karuta continued to smile gleefully. Taleo glared straight at Raven, his cutlass held high. He was carefully assessing his main opponent. After a few seconds of glancing at Raven's dual-wielding stance, he knew he was no ordinary foe and opened his mouth again. However, dealing with 4 at once is a bit much. Taleo smirked wickedly and said to Raven, So, let me take care of the unnecessary ones first. Immediately after, Taleo released a terrifying burst of energy through his fist, which was the size of a normal person's head. He suddenly swung his veiny, aura-clad fist towards Raven, startling him. However, Taleo wasn't aiming at Raven, but slammed his fist straight into the floor beneath his feet. The power of the punch was so immense that it created a shockwave and cracks that spread throughout the hallway and down the stairs below. Ian exclaimed in bewilderment, not understanding Taleo's purpose. What the hell? The hallway between the stairs began to collapse. Raven and the girls hurriedly fled up the opposite staircase leading to the 3rd floor. However, Isla and Karuta had nowhere to run, as the staircase they were on collapsed in an instant. From the secret room, Seyrod let out a pained, regretful groan. Ah, my staircase. In just a few seconds, the entire staircase from the waiting hall down to the 1st floor had disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. Karuta struggled to his feet in the wreckage and grumbled, gnashing his teeth. He roared as he looked up at the 2nd floor of the mansion. What the hell is wrong with that idiot? Isla was also unharmed from the collapse, but he didn't say a word, silently observing the situation. Karuta grumbled irritably, not understanding Taleo's purpose. He just made us fall straight to the 1st floor. In reality, with Isla and Karuta's abilities, it would only take a few leaps for them to get back up to the 2nd floor staircase. So, Taleo's action, if only to separate them, was rather meaningless. Suddenly, from behind Karuta and Isla, the hoarse voices of the Roan pirates echoed, startling them both. Hey look! It's an orc! At that moment, the Roan pirates, having finished dealing with the nobles in the hall, pointed their swords at Karuta. Great! We were getting sick of eating those fatty pigs. Orc meat! First come, first served! Karuta exclaimed in shock. The one-eyed guys! We met them at the harbor! Isla's eyes also widened in astonishment. Now he understood how Taleo intended to hold them down here. Karuta fiercely brandished his axe. Ha! I'm the one who's going to eat you with a fine mug of beer, you damn pirates! Immediately after, the Roan pirates charged into a chaotic battle with Karuta and Isla. The two of them fought in perfect coordination, like a well-oiled pair. Meanwhile, the situation on the 2nd floor was no less tense. Ian and Taleo were on one side of the 2nd floor hallway, while Raven and the girls were on the opposite side. Taleo grinned smugly, narrowing his eyes at Ian with a challenging look. Well now, only the cat and the snake are left. Now I can enjoy my meal in peace. He immediately pointed his cutlass at Ian with an eager expression. You first, kitty cat. After a second of shock, Ian's expression returned to its usual prideful state. You may be a giant pig, but your strength is no joke. However, do you think that in a battle, strength is the only deciding factor? Ian said as he raised his sword and got into a ready stance with a confident smile. Irene, standing on the other side of the hallway, couldn't help but worry about Ian. Will the prince be all right? But Ingrid looked at her with eyes full of confidence in Ian. Don't worry, Ingrid said excitedly to Irene. My brother is no ordinary swordsman. It's rumored that when it comes to technique, he's the best in the capital. And I've never seen him lose, not even once. Ingrid shouted enthusiastically, as if to cheer Ian on to showcase his skills and simultaneously make Taleo wary of her brother. Ian focused his gaze, moonlight shining on his raised sword held level with his face. A piercing clash of steel rang out as Ian lunged at Taleo with a lightning-fast thrust. But Taleo easily blocked the thrust with a spinning motion, swinging his sword in a diagonal slash. Clanging sounds followed one after another. The powerful attacks were like a continuous storm, but both of them dodged and parried every one of their opponent's attacks by observing each other's movements. The two swords drew beautiful arcs in the air. Irene exclaimed in amazement, Whoa! A series of amazing attacks from the prince. It seems that pirate can't fight back. Raven stood with the girls, but his perspective was completely different from theirs. He silently assessed Teleo's swordsmanship and realized that things were not as simple as the girls saw. Teleo's sword style was very unique. A swordsman trained in the Empire with orthodox fighting methods would be bewildered by Teleo's swordsmanship. Just as Raven thought, Ian was truly struggling to deal with Teleo. Although it looked like he was the one overwhelming his opponent, in reality, Teleo's sword strikes could both block Ian's attacks and immediately counterattack, forcing Ian to be extremely cautious. Ian increasingly felt overwhelmed by Teleo as their swords clashed. I can't feel anything. I can't predict what he's going to do. Teleo's blade moved through the air so fast that Ian could only see faint afterimages. He wondered in confusion, did he just counterattack? Teleo smirked as he looked into Ian's eyes, which were gradually losing their initial confidence. He sneered, "Look closely. It's right here." Immediately after, he rotated his wrist, flicking Ian's sword down and applying strong pressure near the hilt, making it impossible for Ian to withdraw his sword. In that moment, Ian instantly realized he had fallen into a dangerous situation. Ingrid and Irene also saw Ian's disadvantage at the same time. They couldn't help but cry out and worry, but could do nothing to help him. Teleo leaned close to Ian's ear and said in a mocking tone, "The storm of the capital? Is this all you've got?" Without hesitation, he tightened his other fist and swung it from behind Ian. The energy gathered in his fist was ready for a finishing blow. While Ian was helpless to change his dire situation, a flash of light suddenly streaked past Teleo's face. It was Raven, lunging forward and swinging the Pendragon family's heirloom sword, intending to cut off his head, but he managed to lean back in time to avoid it. Raven had attacked with his fastest, most sudden and lightning-fast strike, but the result was not as he had hoped, as only a small spurt of blood came from Teleo's face. Raven's blade had only grazed his cheek, leaving a cut that was not too deep. Having just narrowly escaped death, Ian cast aside his pride and shouted, "Aaron!" Raven unhesitatingly suggested, "Let's attack together. He's not ordinary." For a proud prince like Ian, it wouldn't be easy to decide to fight 2-on-1. That was why Raven had only intervened in the duel when Ian was in a dangerous situation. Teleo stood stunned for a moment as he touched the wound on his cheek. Although it wasn't too deep, it was enough to leave a scar. He gritted his teeth as he looked at his blood-stained fingers. "That one surprised me. How long has it been since I last shed blood?" However, Teleo did not remain surprised or annoyed for long. He quickly grinned in delight, his eyes squinting as he targeted Raven. "Perhaps I should have started with the snake." A clearly visible green energy rose from Raven. The overwhelming presence of an aura was radiating from his shoulders. The white dragon's energy quickly formed into the shape of a dragon coiling around Raven, carrying the incredible pressure of a dragon. Teleo twisted his body slightly, stretching his muscles, then pulled out a large shield. He let out a hearty chuckle. "My meal has become much more interesting." He challenged the two of them in a gruff voice while raising the large shield to protect himself. "Give it your all, because if you lose, I'll eat both you and those women." Meanwhile, on the first floor, Karuta was getting the all-out fight he desired. He swung his axe tirelessly, each chop severing a limb from some roan pirate. Isla was also fighting with all his might against the roan pirates. Each of his sword strikes was a fatal blow aimed at the opponent's throat or heart. As soon as he had cleared a considerable number of roan pirates blocking his way, Isla immediately jumped up the stairs leading to the second floor to assist his master. Isla didn't dare to delay for even a second. He ran swiftly up the steps, his eyes never leaving the battle situation on the second floor. Isla quickly saw the spot he needed to reach, where Raven and Ian were fighting together against Teleo, who was as big as the two of them combined. They coordinated seamlessly, but it seemed they were still no match for Teleo. Isla was so focused on Raven that he didn't notice the appearance of another enemy near him. Just as Isla was about to set foot on the second floor hallway, a black shadow leaped down from somewhere behind him. He was dressed in all black like a ninja, and in his hands were two black-hilted swords, similar to the type Raven often used. The dark swordsman swung his swords, suddenly slashing at Isla from behind. But thanks to his sharp intuition, he managed to lean and dodge it in time. Isla spun around to face the dark swordsman and continuously moved his body on the stairs to evade the successive attacks from both of his hands. Spotting a gap between the dark swordsman's attacks, Isla immediately swung his sword to counterattack. With a single move, swinging both swords horizontally from the center of his chest outwards, Isla easily disarmed the dark swordsman. The dark swordsman hastily leaped back a few steps down the stairs, while helplessly watching his two swords clatter to the ground. He was so shocked that he trembled, unable to believe he could be disarmed so quickly. Isla stared at the dark swordsman with sharp eyes and asked bluntly, "You're that knight from before, aren't you?" The dark swordsman, who was indeed John Vincent, was once again stunned. He widened his eyes and looked up at Isla with an expression of disbelief. Isla crossed his two swords in front of his chest, ready to attack. A Von Vass knight, once he senses another warrior's aura, will never forget it. John Vincent remained silent at Isla's question, mainly because he had no way to justify himself. But because of this, A glint of killing intent flashed in his eyes. Without hesitation, John Vincent drew the Seirod Knight's sword he always carried at his side.
I have a reason to eliminate you right now, so fight seriously.
Because Isla had discovered his identity, he had to try to kill him to cover up Count Seirod's involvement in this whole incident. As soon as John Vincent finished speaking, he charged forward to attack. A sound echoed through the air as Isla blocked the attack with his own sword. Sparks flew into the air, signaling the start of another unforgiving life-or-death battle. Meanwhile, on the second floor, after a period of fighting 2-on-1, Taleo hadn't suffered another scratch. Instead, he let out a hearty laugh, his voice arrogant and provocative towards Raven and Ian. Try harder, won't you? Raven and Ian, after a series of continuous attacks, stopped and created a distance of about 5 or 6 steps from Taleo. He let out a hideous laugh, egging them on.
Come on! The fate of those women depends entirely on you.
At this point, both Raven and Ian knew that charging forward without a strategy would not defeat him. Ian then whispered to Raven,
Hey, Aaron, I'll make him leave an opening in his defense somewhere. When that happens, you finish him off.
Raven glanced at Ian, slightly surprised. Ho ho? A rather unusual suggestion from you, for a prince who loved to show off, and in front of a group of girls at that. But Ian just clicked his tongue and replied, Now is not the time to maintain that fake image. Even so, I am still the strongest master swordsman in the capital, don't you know? I'll be known for having fought him one-on-one for a while. More importantly, if I'm not alive, how can I build an image? Ian looked at Taleo, who was radiating enough killing intent to swallow them both. A sense of anxiety forced him to admit to Raven,
The only one who can defeat that monster is you.
Ian hesitated for a moment, reluctantly speaking his true thoughts that he had hidden for so long. You are stronger than me. Raven was surprised by Ian's praise, finding it hard to believe such a proud prince could decisively set aside his ego. Instead of responding seriously to Ian's sincere remark, Raven laughed and teased him. Just don't get yourself killed immediately. Ian smirked and muttered in reply, Hey, that's not funny. Immediately after, he raised his sword and glared at Taleo, determined to put his all into this fight. In a flash, the two young men, one dressed in black and the other in white, charged at Taleo with their swords. They looked like two emissaries of life and death, ready to escort Taleo's soul to the underworld. The Seirod mansion was now filled with the sound of clashing swords, from the second floor down to the stairs and the first floor. Everywhere was a scene of fierce sword fighting, with sparks and blood splattering. Karuta, with his overwhelming strength, had single-handedly smashed more than a dozen Rowan pirates. He became even more frenzied in the fierce battle and the smell of blood. The strongest orc warrior of the Ancona forest charged at his opponents like a beast, tearing apart corpses. Orcs were a race born to fight, so they usually charged into battle without thinking. But since Karuta had joined Pendragon, he had begun to change that habit. He constantly paid attention to others around him. This is a mess. I'm still on the first floor fighting these sticky pirates, while Isla is being held up by some suspicious bastard on the stairs. While fighting on the first floor, Karuta occasionally glanced up at the second floor to check the situation. The more he thought, the more anxious he became. At this rate, we won't be able to get to the second floor to help. Isla was also eager to get to the second floor, so he tried to end his fight with John Vincent as quickly as possible with fatal sword strikes. But John Vincent was no slouch, and had managed to drag it out for quite some time. Not only was he good at defending, but John Vincent also counterattacked Isla, trading blow for blow. The sword strikes were so fast that their afterimages almost blended into the light of the room. Isla had to constantly change direction and dodge the deadly blade as it slashed towards him. Taking the opportunity while ducking to avoid John Vincent's attack, Isla immediately swung his sword to cut at his knee. The sword drew a beautiful arc in the air. However, the nimble John Vincent suddenly leaped high, somersaulting over Isla's head and completely avoiding his attack. After a perfect somersault, John Vincent landed on a higher step, a few steps away from where Isla stood. He landed as lightly as a crane perching on a pine tree. Seeing Isla's haste to end the fight, John Vincent smirked and provoked him. Don't be in such a hurry. Let's play slowly. I won't let you go up to the second floor. Isla's face darkened upon hearing John Vincent's declaration, but he had no other choice but to put all his effort into dealing with him. Meanwhile, on the second floor, Taleo was showing off his mastery of his unique fighting style, having grown up with orcs, combining the curved sword used by an offshore orc species and a dwarf-forged shield. Taleo's large body charged forward with extreme speed, unbefitting his size. Taleo brought his blade straight down in front of Raven. Unflinching, he crossed his two swords to block his blade. While Taleo's sword was busy in a power struggle with Raven, Ian jumped up and raised his sword high. He intended to take the opportunity to slash at his arm, but Taleo had caught Ian's movement out of the corner of his eye. A sound echoed through the air as Taleo blocked Ian's attack with his shield. A scornful smile appeared on his lips. A cat's trick. A storm of powerful, relentless attacks came from both directions, but Taleo blocked and parried every single attack by observing Raven's and Ian's movements. As metal clashed with metal, sparks flew everywhere like fireworks. Taleo leisurely blocked all the attacks of the two swordsmen, even though they attacked simultaneously and with great coordination. The fight was so easy that Taleo became complacent and laughed mockingly. "Ho, ho, ho! Look at this! Is this all you two can do?" The next second, Ian's blade slashed across his head, but he simply leaned back and easily dodged it without a single hair being cut. Raven's and Ian's attacks increased in force and speed, but Taleo still dodged them gracefully despite his massive frame. The more Ian missed, the more hasty he became. He couldn't help but feel anxious and panicked.
Damn it. Even though he's huge, he's still so fast. This isn't good. In a moment of carelessness, Ian missed his attack rhythm, causing a startled Raven to shout his name as a reminder. However, Raven's warning was not faster than Taleo's speed. He appeared like a ghost, slipping behind Ian with his cutlass raised high. His sharp eyes aimed straight at Ian's head. Startled, Ian immediately spun around and raised his sword high above his head to block Taleo's attack. With a loud crash, the long sword in Ian's hand was cut in two. Metal fragments flew into the air. The clean cut showed that Taleo overwhelmingly surpassed both Raven and Ian in both strength and endurance. They were the ones constantly attacking, but the one who destroyed his opponent's sword first was Taleo, and there seemed to be no hope of exhausting Taleo by blocking the relentless wave of attacks. Taleo chuckled, glancing at Ian's shocked, dazed expression. "One down." Just as he was about to finish Ian with another sword strike, Raven instantly charged at him with all his speed. His action forced Taleo to quickly shift his attention away from Ian. Smugly, Taleo didn't even bother with the now unarmed Ian. He gleefully rushed towards Raven with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Ian, no longer having a weapon to fight with, let go of the broken hilt. It seemed as if Ian was about to give up the fight, leaving the stage for Raven and Taleo. However, Ian took advantage of Taleo's lowered guard and suddenly grabbed onto his sword arm, causing him to freeze in surprise. Raven's eyes lit up as he realized Ian's intention. He didn't expect Ian to be willing to lower his pride to this extent. Ian didn't hesitate to shout, urging Raven on. "Do it now, Aaron!" Seizing the opportunity, Raven charged forward with the Pendragon family's heirloom sword raised high. This time, they were almost certain the attack would seriously injure Taleo. However, Taleo was a seasoned warrior. He unexpectedly let go of the sword in his hand as soon as he saw it become useless. In the next instant, he decisively lifted his massive, pillar-like arm, lifting Ian, who was clinging tightly to it, along with him, causing him to widen his eyes in astonishment. Taleo swung his entire arm, carrying Ian, and flung him into the air. The inertia was so strong that Ian could no longer hold on. He was thrown backward, losing his grip, and his whole body tumbled through the air, stunned. Raven's eyes widened in disbelief at the unbelievable sight. His entire body froze instantly, and at the same time, he stopped his sword strike. Ian, thrown into the air, still hadn't understood what was happening and could only let his body fly wherever it would. The next second, Ian landed right where Raven had stopped. His entire back slammed straight into Raven's stomach, and they both fell to the ground. Raven could do nothing but absorb the full impact from Ian. But that wasn't all. Raven was further surprised by Taleo's next action. Taleo took the opportunity to charge at Raven, his thick, large shield held firmly in his left hand. Raven, who was in the process of falling backward, could do nothing but resign himself to taking this attack. Raven grit his teeth, bracing for the anticipated pain as the shield flew towards his arm. The shield slammed into the middle of Raven's right forearm with a horrific cracking sound. Taleo was almost certain of his victory as soon as he felt the shield make a strong impact. The sound of breaking bones rang out simultaneously with Raven's shrill scream. A suffocating pain erupted, quickly cutting off his scream. The sound of pain was choked in his chest. Raven coughed up a thick pool of blood. His already pale face turned ashen, like a drowned corpse. His eyes became dull and lifeless, as if he had lost consciousness. Raven passed out instantly while his entire body was thrown away by Taleo's blow like a broken puppet. Ian shouted Aaron's name in horror, his face filled with alarm. He was not only stunned by the disastrous failure of their plan, but also genuinely worried for Raven. Hearing Ian's shout, Taleo unhesitatingly swung a leg and kicked him straight in the stomach. His leg, raised 3 meters high, lifted Ian's entire body into the air. Ian spat blood from his mouth, cutting off the scream that had yet to escape his throat. His stomach endured a writhing, tearing sensation, an excruciating pain as if being crushed by an elephant. Taleo kicked Ian 8 feet away. If a table hadn't been in the way, there's no telling how much further he would have flown. The wooden table broke in two instantly from the impact. Both Ingrid and Irene screamed their brother's name in unison, their voices filled with sorrow. Tears streamed from the corners of the young women's eyes like a river. But Taleo's ferocious expression kept them from moving even a single step. With victory firmly in his grasp, Taleo let out a long laugh that sounded like the roar of a beast. To me, you humans are just food." His savage laughter echoed throughout the mansion, and the fierce killing intent radiating from him erupted like a fire being fed with oil. The loud commotion quickly attracted the attention of Isla, who was standing on the stairs. Alarmed, Isla immediately shouted, "Pendragon!" in an uncontrollably agitated state. However, that 1 second of carelessness caused him to be hit by John Vincent's sword. The sharp blade flew towards Isla while his guard was down, but luckily it only grazed his cheek. The corner of John Vincent's mouth pulled up slightly, a glint of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. "Now is not the time to look away, is it?" Isla's pupils blazed with rage. He had been held up here for nearly half an hour, and he was burning with impatience. John Vincent's provocation, instead of making Isla hasty and careless, would only make him more focused. Back to the one-sided fight on the second floor, Taleo was gleefully spinning around in the hallway, admiring the 2 bloody works of art he had just created. His hoarse voice, like a vulture's cry, rang out again with an arrogant tone. "Well now, I've dealt with the cat and the snake. Next, it's time to eat those women, isn't it?" Taleo cackled as he gnashed his teeth together, creating threatening sounds. He narrowed his eyes with amusement, gazing at the 4 trembling girls huddled together in a corner of the hallway. Taleo leisurely took slow steps towards the 4 girls. He felt no need to rush, as the slender legs of the young ladies, even if they ran with all their might, would not escape his grasp. Besides, the staircase leading down to the first floor had been cut off. They had no way to run. The 4 girls were frozen in place with fear. They shivered uncontrollably while tears automatically streamed down their pale faces. They were even too scared to scream for help. However, a strange and terrifying sight stopped Taleo in his tracks. His eyes widened in astonishment. For the first time, he felt such horror. Taleo stood frozen like a stone statue as Raven shakily got to his feet, one arm hanging limp and bleeding profusely. Blood also gushed from his mouth, soaking the ground. The moment the girls saw Raven stand up in such a critical state, they all cried out in unison, worried for him. Taleo felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked at Raven's zombie-like appearance. He frowned with doubt and horror. It's impossible for a human to stand up after taking that hit. Not only his right arm, but even his internal organs should have been crushed. Taleo couldn't help but panic, repeatedly reminding himself how hard he had hit Raven, but his resilience was completely unexpected. Not only could Raven get back up, but he also opened his mouth to speak. "You are truly strong." At first, Taleo suspected this was just a flicker of Raven's dying embers, forcing his body up before death, but now he could no longer reassure himself like that. The girls fell silent, anxiously listening to Raven's heavy breaths mixed with his words. "You have both physical strength and skill. You have no openings." Raven raised his sword with his left hand, pointing it at the stunned Taleo. He began to regain his challenging tone and posture. "But I have killed an opponent of this caliber a long time ago." As Raven spoke, a confident smile appeared on his face. He could feel his broken bones digging into his flesh, but the fight was not over, for he still had the trump card of the Troll King's regenerative power. Taleo continued to stare at Raven with a mixture of astonishment and suspicion. He didn't know that Raven was looking at him with the eyes of Alan Smith, who had battled all sorts of monsters from across the Empire for a decade. To Alan, Taleo was only as strong as the Troll King. A few minutes had passed, but Taleo was still pondering Raven's incomprehensible statement. He asked him curiously, "So, a long time ago, you killed someone like me?" Seeing Raven just give a confident smile, Taleo scratched his head and jeered at him with concern. "Ha ha! What nonsense are you talking about? Did I beat you so badly that you went crazy, you worthless worm?" Raven smirked and replied, "Even if I explained, you wouldn't understand." Taleo felt insulted by that statement. Though it was Raven's honest answer, to his ears it sounded like a taunt that he wasn't smart enough to understand. Raven frowned, staring at Taleo as horrific scenes from his past, 10 years of fighting in the Demon Corps, flooded his mind. The comparison was inevitable. "You are very strong, but you are nothing compared to that one. The ruler of 50 elephant-sized swamp trolls who single-handedly slaughtered half the Demon Corps. The most brutal and evil creature. The Troll King. The monster that gave me immortality and healing, but cost me a lifetime of luck." While Taleo and Raven were talking, the blood on Raven's right arm began to flow less, and the bloodstains on his hand dried up quickly. It only took a moment for him to be able to gently move the fingers of his shattered arm. Raven slowly raised his right arm while looking at Taleo with a challenging gaze. Although it couldn't yet function normally with its full strength, he could now flex it comfortably. Raven couldn't help but smile proudly at his nearly immortal body. Taleo's eyes widened again in confusion. Normally, or even just an hour ago, he would have charged at Raven without a second thought. But now, he was hesitating. He had changed his mind when he saw Raven's arm. Taleo couldn't take his eyes off Raven's arm, which was recovering at an incredible rate. His right arm should have been crushed. How can he still move it? Ingrid curiously glanced at Irene and whispered,
Has something like this ever happened before? Like what he just said? Irene shook her head in confusion. No, my brother has never been in such trouble. Lindsay, who had served Aaron Pendragon for many years, also found it confusing and muttered, "Perhaps we misheard?" Only Luna was silent, her eyes fixed on Raven with a thoughtful gaze. A wave of regret surged through the lovelorn young lady. Back then, I thought he had no self-respect or pride at all. The more heroic Luna found Raven now, the more she regretted her past contempt for Aaron Pendragon and his family. But that regret was too late. At first, Taleo thought this fight would be like taking candy from a baby, but now it was no longer the case. He had to change his perspective and become more cautious when facing Raven. Despite his increased wariness, he was still very arrogant and confident in his abilities.
A sarcastic tone once again seeped from between his teeth. "Stop trying to act cool, you half-dead little bastard!" Taleo instantly closed the distance with Raven and swung his sword high with a terrifying killing intent. "Die, you bastard!" Raven nimbly lowered his center of gravity, slipping under Taleo's sharp blade. The blade cut through empty air. Raven spun around and jumped behind Taleo while his hand was still in the momentum of his initial attack. Taleo had managed to follow Raven's shadow as it passed behind him, but his massive body suddenly felt much slower than before. He couldn't keep up with Raven, making Raven look like a squirrel deftly scampering around a giant tree trunk. As Raven swung his sword from behind Taleo, he couldn't help but exclaim in his mind, "That little punk shouldn't be able to move like that." Fortunately for Taleo, just as Raven's blade was about to slash him, he managed to turn in time and block the attack with his shield. Taleo immediately counterattacked. He pushed his shield towards Raven, causing the blade to bounce back towards him. Then, Taleo used his muscular strength to swing the shield horizontally, forcing Raven to jump back a few steps. As Raven dragged his body about 5 or 6 meters away from Taleo, he observed his movements and was already calculating his next move. However, what Taleo did next confused Raven. He had been hiding his cards until now. Taleo twisted his body slightly and raised his large shield to protect himself. At the same time, the weapon in his hand disappeared from Raven's sight, a trick he had never used before. Raven was momentarily stunned, not knowing whether to dodge or attack. "Because of the shield, I can't see where his sword is." In the tense silence, Raven quickly regained his composure and glanced down at the ground. As he looked from the shield down to Taleo's feet, Raven noticed the faint shadow of the sword on the floor, created by the chandelier's light. A flash of insight struck Raven's mind. He wants to thrust. He bent his body and jumped to the side, perfectly dodging Taleo's thrust. Taleo thought it was just Raven's luck. He repeated his move, pulling the shield on his left arm up to completely obscure Raven's vision for a moment. A series of powerful thrusts and slashes were continuously launched and retracted from behind the shield. But Raven dodged and parried every single attack by observing the shadows and Taleo's footwork. Taleo's attacks intensified as he grew angry at Raven's agile movements in dodging his attacks. But Raven continued to move like the wind, smoothly weaving out of the sharp blade's path. Despite his superior strength, Taleo was still human. After attacking continuously more than 9 times, his breathing became labored and his slashes visibly weakened. Raven only needed to raise his sword with normal force to block it. Taleo stood stunned, frozen in place, as all 10 of his attacks were neutralized in one way or another. He was sure it wasn't Raven's luck, but he still couldn't figure out what trick he was using. Raven smirked smugly as he looked at Taleo's wide, astonished eyes. He dealt him another psychological blow. "I told you before, didn't I? I've fought and killed opponents of your caliber before. Perhaps even stronger than you." The two men paused their duel for a moment and moved away from each other. Unspoken, they both wanted to keep a safe distance to reevaluate their opponent. Raven searched his past life's memories of battles to find information about the swordsmanship Taleo was using. The synergy between his shield and sword. It must be the Jardone style. Jardone is a city on the sea built by ancient dwarves. Orcs conquered it over a decade ago and built the largest orc kingdom in the empire. Most dwarves moved to the southern mountains inland, but a small number remain under the control of the orcs. The weapons, shields, and armor produced by the dwarves are of excellent quality. By combining the curved sword, the main weapon used by the island orcs, and the shield, which carries the pride of the dwarves who crafted it, they created a unique style of swordsmanship. Raven didn't stop his line of reasoning there. He wanted to find out his opponent's identity, so he thought deeper. His strange way of throwing people earlier, to counter Ian's arm lock, was definitely similar to the way Isla used to throw people when they first met. So it seems he's also proficient in southern techniques. That means this monster's origin is somewhere around the southern seas. Raven frowned as the clues about Taleo became clearer. Perhaps he's half human and half orc, and he might be a famous warrior in the south, or the illegitimate son of some noble with special tastes. Meanwhile, Taleo was also staring at Raven with eyes full of killing intent and curiosity. Taleo narrowed his eyes, his face contorting. His intent to kill became thicker,
but at the same time, a sense of curiosity arose. It's obvious he recovered too quickly for a normal person, and he could even counter the Jardun style. Taleo also recalled his past battles. All those puny insects who learned the standard swordsmanship of the imperial family were crushed by this style in an instant. So how could this albino snake? Taleo grumbled as questions popped into his head without answers. Has he fought a user of the Jardun style before? No. There's no way this brat has experience fighting it. Taleo was so annoyed that his face wrinkled up like a dried jujube as he thought of Raven's earlier provocation. I've killed opponents like you before. The longer they rested, the more Taleo noticed how quickly Raven's arm was recovering. He began to feel confused. I'm superior in both strength and skill, but there's something very strange about this brat. Taleo, however, was a wise warrior. Instead of charging head-on again, he cautiously observed the overall battle situation in the mansion. That useless cat I dealt with hasn't been completely defeated yet. If the guys with this brat downstairs manage to get up here, it'll be dangerous. I can't let things go off plan. Immediately, Taleo raised his sword decisively, reminding himself to use all his remaining strength to fight. To realize the Sea Dragon King's ambition, he had to destroy this Pendragon brat as quickly as possible. He suddenly smiled while grinding his sharp teeth together, creating a shrill, provocative, grating sound. Taleo cracked his neck from side to side and commented while grinning mockingly, "So you're pretty good at dodging, huh? Like a mouse being toyed with by a cat?" Taleo cackled after a few slow but provocative words, which he believed a young man from a great family like Aaron Pendragon, with his high self-esteem, would not be able to tolerate. But Raven responded to his low-level provocation with indifference. He had met opponents of this caliber before and had developed the minimum composure for such situations. Taleo clicked his tongue and changed his tone to one of frustration as soon as he saw Raven's indifference to his provocation. "But you know, I hate fighting without a clear winner. So, let's end this quickly." Taleo suddenly bared his teeth in a sinister grin while glancing at Raven suggestively. "Hey, even worms should know to care for their comrades, right?" Raven instantly understood his intention. He was going to target Ian. He was genuinely startled by the cunning and insidious scheme of this pirate. As soon as Taleo finished speaking, he turned and ran in the opposite direction down the hallway, aiming straight for where the unconscious Ian lay. Raven immediately ran after Taleo, his heart pounding with worry. Damn it! His target is Ian! Ian still hasn't woken up after more than an hour, and there's no sign he'll be strong enough to fight back if Taleo attacks him now. Taleo shot towards Ian with lightning speed that Raven couldn't match. He grabbed his leg and lifted him up as easily as a stuffed animal. Taleo held Ian up, swinging him around playfully with a triumphant look. He burst out laughing with a savage and arrogant tone, declaring, "Hey, you white worm bastard! Since you keep dodging, I'll turn this fool into a bloody mess." Taleo, reveling in his imagined victory, didn't notice that Ian had opened his eyes and was staring at him. In Ian's hand was a half-broken wine bottle, ready to create an interesting surprise for Taleo. The next second, the broad smile on Taleo's lips vanished as Ian bent his body, sat up, and threw the broken bottle straight at his face. The attack was at such close range and so sudden that he could do nothing but widen his eyes. The broken bottle immediately embedded itself in one of Taleo's eye sockets. One could even hear the sound of something like a bubble popping in his eye. Taleo, in agony, immediately let go of Ian's leg. He hastily pulled the bottle out of his eye socket with a scream that shook the entire mansion. Taleo writhed in pain, roaring incomprehensible half-human, half-beast sounds. "You damn bastard! My eye!" Ian laughed gleefully, lying flat on the floor right at Taleo's feet. He smiled slyly and said in a mocking tone, "What's wrong? Surprised? This worm doesn't just know how to run. It's pretty good at counterattacking too, right, you fool?" Taleo roared, spewing curses at Ian. "Die!" He had even forgotten that there was another opponent behind him. Right after Taleo's mournful scream, a terrifying aura flowed towards the back of his neck. It was Raven, seizing the opportunity to launch a surprise attack from behind. Taleo instantly felt a shiver run down his spine. Raven gathered his energy for a decisive lightning-fast attack. His eyes flashed with a brilliant blue light, like the fire of the white dragon burning within. The piercing sounds of clashing metal echoed once again. A thick cloud of dust obscured the view of the second-floor hallway. Would the battle end as easily as Raven and Ian had hoped? Right after Taleo's mournful scream, a terrifying aura flowed towards the back of his neck. It was Raven, seizing the opportunity to launch a surprise attack from behind. Taleo instantly felt a shiver run down his spine. Raven gathered his energy for a decisive, lightning-fast attack. His eyes flashed with a brilliant blue light, like the fire of the white dragon burning within. A cold breeze blew across the back of Taleo's neck. Losing one eye did not mean losing the sharp senses of a seasoned warrior. He immediately glanced back as soon as he felt Raven's killing intent approaching. Following Raven's flame-like erupting aura was the sound of air being torn apart. The thick cloud of dust obscured the view of the second-floor hallway. Only a large, dark shadow could be vaguely seen moving very quickly through the dense dust.
Taleo spun around in an instant, his sword slashing a brilliant horizontal line. A metallic screech sounded as Raven's thin longsword broke into several pieces. The sword had already developed cracks from blocking Taleo's previous attacks, so it was inevitable that it would shatter. Ian's eyes widened in astonishment. He still managed to react in that instant. Immediately after, Raven unhesitatingly let go of the shattered sword. He instantly spun around and, quick as a flash, grabbed Taleo's sword hand while he was still not expecting him to counterattack barehanded. Raven used his smaller frame compared to Taleo to spin and leap onto his arm, simultaneously hooking one leg under his armpit and wrapping the other across his neck. In that moment, although Taleo was slightly startled, he immediately realized Raven's intention.
This brat is using my blind spot to lock my neck? Taleo unhesitatingly let go of his sword. Just as Raven's leg was about to lock Taleo's neck, he smirked and, while lunging forward, quickly bent the arm Raven was clinging to. "This trick is useless against me!" Taleo bent his arm with such speed and force that Raven, who hadn't yet secured a firm grip, was thrown off by the momentum. The moment Raven was about to be flung away, he made another surprising move. His hand suddenly gripped Taleo's thumb tightly. The smile on Taleo's lips instantly vanished. He was both astonished and confused, unable to understand what Raven intended to do next. Taleo could never have imagined that Raven would break his thumb. Pain immediately shot up his arm, along with a crisp, cracking sound like a dry branch snapping. Taleo's eyes bulged so much that his eyeball seemed about to pop out of its socket from the shock and pain that shot to his brain. A roar mixed with pain and anger echoed throughout the mansion. The sudden pain made him lose his senses and stumble off balance. Raven seized the opportunity to wrap his leg around his neck again, and in an instant threw him to the ground. Taleo's massive body was flipped upside down, while Raven landed with his back to the ground. But Raven did not let him go so easily. He resolutely held Taleo's neck tight while his two hands grabbed his arm. Both Raven and Taleo were now on their backs on the floor. One of Raven's legs pressed on Taleo's neck, while his other foot pushed into his armpit. His two legs clamped Taleo's arm between them, and his two hands pulled his wrist with all his might. The sound of snapping branches rang out again as each joint along Taleo's arm was pulled apart simultaneously. His elbow was broken. Meanwhile, on the staircase leading to the second floor, the sword fight between Isla and John Vincent was not yet over. The continuous clanging of their swords echoed relentlessly. Isla pushed his sword forward, the two blades grinding against each other, creating a piercing screech. John Vincent was gradually being overwhelmed by Isla's strength and had to tense all his muscles to block his sword. Unfortunately for John Vincent, even his blade was no match for Isla's sword. Cracks began to appear on his longsword at the point where Isla was applying pressure. John Vincent broke out in a cold sweat as he saw small metal fragments begin to fly off his sword. The cracks spread wider and wider. Isla also saw that John Vincent's blade was reaching its breaking point. He unhesitatingly swung his sword again. When Isla's sword struck, John Vincent's sword was forced to block the attack once more, but it shattered into dozens of pieces instantly. With no obstacle in its path, Isla's blade continued its momentum and sliced a straight line across John Vincent's bicep. A large piece of his sleeve was torn off. Blood spurted from the wound and dripped onto the floor. Half of John Vincent's broken sword was flung behind him. For a moment he was speechless, only able to silently curse why his sword had broken at such a crucial moment. Isla's face was emotionless. Even though the victor had been decided, he showed no arrogance at all. He even gave John Vincent a piece of advice. "A thin sword like that is suited for assassination, not dueling." John Vincent looked at the broken sword in his hand, unable to refute Isla's words, and could only bite his lip bitterly. One of a swordsman's most important skills is choosing a weapon that not only suits their swordsmanship, but also the combat situation. In this regard, John Vincent had been utterly defeated by Isla. No arguments. After a few seconds of shock, John Vincent looked down at his injured bicep and immediately covered it with his other hand. On his bloody shoulder was a tattoo of two opposing towers with a staff in the middle and a yellow semicircular object like a setting sun. Isla frowned, staring at the tattoo on John Vincent's arm. The wound wasn't so severe that he needed to cover it up in such a hurry. He couldn't help but be curious as to why he wanted to hide it. Just then, a shrill scream, like that of a wild animal caught in a trap, echoed from the second floor. The pained, wailing cry immediately attracted everyone's attention below. John Vincent, already at a disadvantage, became even more panicked. He looked back up at the second-floor hallway in horror, his anxiety rising. Was that the Black King's voice? Meanwhile, Isla let out an amused laugh. Even when he had defeated his opponent, he had shown no emotion. Yet, as soon as he saw a sign of victory from Raven's side, he couldn't hide his joy. John Vincent was still reeling from the scream, unconsciously recalling how terrifyingly powerful Taleo had been at the Killer Whale Tavern. His eyes were filled with horror and disbelief. Cold sweat streamed down his face. Was that really the monster's voice? The unexpected joy for Isla was doubled, and the fear in John Vincent's heart was amplified when Karuta's roar echoed up from the first floor. It was a roar of overwhelming victory.
Surrounding Karuta were the corpses of a dozen Rowan orcs in all sorts of positions. Only Paku remained as his last opponent. After a fierce roar, Karuta swung his axe again and chopped straight at Paku's neck. The one-eyed Rowan orc raised his sword to block but couldn't stop Karuta's axe. A crescent-shaped arc of light flashed through the air, slicing through Paku's neck and severing his sword arm. Blood spurted from the severed arm and neck. He collapsed, his head hitting the floor at Karuta's feet. Karuta triumphantly beat his chest like a gorilla. "Now do you get it, you Rowan orc?" Karuta roared at Paku with all his anger and glee. "Damn pirate orcs!" Karuta threw his head back and let out mighty roars mixed with hearty laughter. "The orcs of the Ancona forest are the strongest!" John Vincent received a double shock and couldn't close his jaw, which was hanging open in horror. The orcs from the islands were completely wiped out? He looked into Isla's glaring, murderous eyes and couldn't help but feel bewildered. What the hell are these guys? John Vincent glanced down at Karuta's ferocious face. He swallowed nervously, a chill running down his spine. Karuta will quickly come up the stairs after finishing off the Roan orcs, and I, alone and without a weapon, have no chance of winning. Knowing for sure that he had no chance of victory, John Vincent decisively leaped off the stairs and quickly found a way to escape. Isla was slightly surprised when John Vincent fled, but he seemed to have no intention of pursuing him. Isla was not so battle-hungry as to be blind. He knew what was more important right now. His gaze quickly shifted up to the second-floor hallway. Without hesitation, Isla ignored the fleeing John Vincent and rushed up to the second floor to assist his master. Taleo had managed to stand up, but his right arm hung limp and useless. His thumb was twisted and deformed like a pretzel. Meanwhile, Raven's arm was now fully recovered. He had even taken Taleo's sword and was ready in an attack stance. Raven smirked, looking straight into Taleo's eyes with a provocative feeling. "The tables have turned, haven't they?" Taleo glared at him with furious, wide eyes. He gnashed his teeth in anger. Bloodshot veins appeared in the whites of Taleo's eyes. He was fuming but still full of pride, forcing out each word. "Don't rely too much on luck. Even if I lose an arm, I won't lose to a lower being." Just then, Karuta and Isla, having finished their business below, quickly ran up, causing Taleo to frown in alarm. All the arrogance and confidence on his face instantly vanished. Everyone on the second floor turned their eyes towards Isla and Karuta. Although they looked a little tired, they had no significant injuries apart from a few minor scratches. Raven joyfully called out his two comrades' names. Taleo was so shocked he was speechless. He knew for sure that with one disabled arm he couldn't fight against 4 people. It didn't take Taleo 3 seconds to make a decision. He silently let go of the shield in his hand. Then he threw the shield straight at Ian, who was sitting in a corner. Of course, Raven quickly saw Taleo's target. He immediately spun around and launched a high kick, blocking the shield that was flying towards Ian at a not-so-fast speed. The moment the shield hit the ground, Raven turned back to face Taleo. It was clear that he hadn't expected to finish Ian with just that mediocre shield throw. As expected, Taleo had taken the opportunity to flee during the few seconds Raven's eyes were off him. By the time he looked back, he saw him standing on the windowsill. Taleo, standing on the windowsill with a guaranteed escape, spoke in a challenging tone to Raven. "Let's have a rematch in the future. At that time, I will definitely chop off your head." As soon as he finished speaking, Taleo leaped from the window overlooking the mansion's backyard. Raven rushed to the window and reached for him, but it was too late. As Taleo leaped from the window, he whistled, signaling his comrades outside the mansion for support. From the trees surrounding the outside of the mansion, a loud rustling sound was immediately heard. In the next instant, a griffin with purple-blue feathers that almost blended into the night shot out from the trees. Taleo landed precisely on its neck and grabbed the reins with one hand, controlling it. He steered the griffin in an arc through the air and then flew off into the dark night. Raven and the others could only stand by helplessly and watch him escape. Karuta roared in frustration, his voice filled with regret. "That damn pirate escaped on the back of a griffin!" Raven calmly shook his head. "Anyway, I've injured his right arm and eye, so for now, he won't be able to immediately lead his troops back to attack." Isla pondered for a moment and then shared the information he had gathered from his fight with John Vincent. "The one who attacked me was that knight named Vincent." Raven and Karuta were both stunned and exclaimed, "What? Why would that knight—" Ian was not so surprised. He had already guessed the mastermind behind this incident. He said to Raven in frustration, "So this whole chaos was planned from the beginning. That rotten old man." Raven thoughtfully rubbed his chin for a moment and then replied, "This reason alone might not be enough to prove his guilt." He turned to Isla to ask for more clues. "By the way, Isla, was that knight Vincent that strong?" Isla was silent for a moment, thinking carefully about their duel. Isla unhesitatingly admitted, "In battle, we were evenly matched. There's no way he's some unknown nobody." Isla paused for a moment, then continued as if he had just remembered something important. "Moreover," Isla pointed to his own right bicep and described John Vincent's tattoo. "He has a tattoo of a pair of towers on his shoulder." Hearing this, Raven immediately showed a look of astonishment. The clue Isla had provided him was truly important and useful.
The name Vincent was too common, so Raven hadn't even considered the possibility of such a coincidence. While Raven was fighting at Count Seyrod's mansion, it was a rather quiet night outside the Pendragon's seaside villa.
The space was so quiet that one could hear the wind whistling in gusts, as if someone was waving giant fans. Helen and Mia were sitting and enjoying the cool breeze on the villa's balcony with Tata and Kale. The city at the end of the coast was radiating a brilliant light, as if trying to obscure the loneliness of the night sea. Suddenly, Helen noticed the sound of the fans growing stronger. She looked up into the distance. Under a full, bright moon, flying objects like a giant flock of birds were faintly appearing. After a closer look at the dozens of shadows flying under the moonlight through the night, Helen's eyes widened in horror. Huh? They were purple-blue griffins, exactly the same type Taleo had ridden when he escaped. The sound, like fans, was the sound of their flapping wings. On the backs of the griffins were roan orcs carrying shiny weapons that reflected the moonlight.
Meanwhile, through the forest outside Count Seyrod's mansion, Taleo had ridden his griffin and escaped a good distance without any sign of pursuit. He was quite relaxed, thinking no one could keep up with him. However, suddenly from the forest, a voice calling his full name made him jump. The shout grew louder and louder. "Taleo! Taleo Aris!" Taleo immediately looked towards the source of the shout. It was Count Seyrod, who had taken a secret shortcut through the forest, caught up and blocked his path. Even with the shortcut, Seyrod was out of breath trying to keep up with Taleo. He gasped for air while roaring in anger. "What is the meaning of this, you bastard?" Taleo controlled the griffin to a screeching halt and landed on the ground immediately. Taleo grumbled in annoyance at Seyrod. "Didn't you promise not to call me that, Governor?" The identity of the Black King, colluding with the Roan pirates, had always been kept secret from others as a prerequisite agreement between the Black King and those who wished to cooperate with him. However, in his anger, Seyrod bluntly dismissed that. "Do you think I would keep my promise? Especially when you're the one who broke the agreement first," Seyrod roared, criticizing Taleo. "You turned my mansion into a complete mess and couldn't even kill a single target." Taleo looked at Seyrod with cold eyes and replied nonchalantly, "Except for not being able to kill that snake, I did a lot of damage to the cat." Taleo's eyes widened, warning Seyrod's attitude, and then spoke with a decisive tone, as if he was sure he held the winning hand. "So now, all that's left is for the sorcerer I brought from the south to finish the rest." Seyrod looked into Taleo's murderous eyes and immediately became hesitant, stepping back. He was so scared he trembled. A sorcerer?" Taleo jumped off the griffin and approached Seyrod, causing him to flinch and step back a little more. "That's right. You wanted to kidnap that white worm's mother, didn't you? I've already sent orcs there too." Taleo laughed and said to Seyrod in a sarcastic and reproachful tone, "Come to think of it, it's really strange, isn't it? We have a sorcerer who specializes in brainwashing and assassination, yet I'm the one who had to run from the mansion."
"More precisely, if the sorcerer were here, there's no way we couldn't have dealt with those insects," Taleo said as he stepped in front of Seyrod. As the man faced a vicious foe 3 times his size, fear locked his feet to the ground, and his face automatically turned pale. The aggressive, critical demeanor he had shown Taleo just moments before had completely vanished. Taleo roared in Seyrod's face like a tiger. "But because I had to send him and half the orcs to the villa to capture that woman for you, we couldn't kill the insects here. It's all because of your insatiable greed." Seyrod, though trembling like a leaf, still tried to act tough and criticized Taleo in a high-pitched voice. "Shut up, Black King! You're the one who boasted about your abilities, and now you can't even complete the mission. You're nothing but a blockhead." As Seyrod was scolding Taleo, he was suddenly flicked lightly on the cheek by one of Taleo's fingers. Seyrod immediately fell silent as his loose teeth flew out of his mouth. He knelt on the ground in pain as his other teeth continued to bid farewell to his old, loose gums and fell out. Taleo cackled and said sarcastically, "Ah, that's right. According to our agreement, I also have to injure you, right?" Then Taleo, grinning widely, stomped hard on Seyrod's leg. "This way, no one will suspect you of orchestrating all of this, right?" His scream rang out at the same time as the cracking sound of breaking bones. Taleo laughed with delight and snatched Seyrod's jewel-encrusted cane. "I'll take this as my reward." The griffin next to him then bit onto his clothes with a cunning expression. In the end, Seyrod was left in the dark, cold forest, unconscious with a severely injured leg and not a scrap of clothing on his body. Meanwhile, a fierce battle was taking place at the Pendragon Villa. In the sky, griffins from both sides tore at each other with fangs and claws. Although Isla was not present, the Ancona Forest griffins followed Soldrake's orders to intercept the enemy on their own. The White Dragon's griffins had overwhelming power compared to the Roan orc griffins. They easily took down their opponents with sharp, knife-like claw strikes. On the ground, the Ancona orc warriors and the Roan orcs were also engaged in a tense and fierce battle. The Ancona orc warriors roared as they faced another orc species for the first time in their lives. Their bloodlust and ambition for battle echoed in the cold sea breeze.
All of the Pendragon family's personnel had been drawn into the fight. When the battle began, the Rowan orcs seemed to have the advantage with nearly 20 warriors. However, after a while, the ground was littered with more Rowan orc corpses than Ancona orc warriors. The surviving Rowan orcs began to panic as their casualties continued to mount. What the hell? We have the numerical advantage! The Ancona orc warriors fiercely charged at the enemy, their eyes filled with killing intent, making the Rowan orcs even more panicked. What the hell? They're so strong! The ferocious roars of the Ancona orc warriors echoed from all directions, and they grew even more ferocious upon seeing their opponent's blood. It wasn't just the Ancona orc warriors participating in this battle. Killian, who had been ordered by Raven to stay and defend the villa, also led the knights in a sweep of the Rowan orcs. The warriors' roars tore through the night. Killian swung his sword, and with a single blow he severed the neck of a Rowan orc 1.5 times his size, demonstrating his superior swordsmanship, strength, and speed compared to the Rowan orcs who were just big. The knights cheered excitedly as soon as they saw the Rowan orc fall at Killian's feet. "Whoa! You got another one, sir! That's our commander Killian for you!"
Killian grinned with delight, looking at the faint blue light covering him and the other warriors. That priest's enhancement spell is pretty good. In the middle of the villa's courtyard, Creighton was holding his staff to the ground. At his feet was a giant magic circle emitting a brilliant green light. The unique ability of an Ancona orc priest was to shake the earth and use tree roots, but that trick wasn't really dangerous to the Rowan orcs. Therefore, Creighton, following Raven's prior instructions, mainly used spells to boost the morale and enhance the strength of the Ancona orc warriors, griffins, and soldiers on their side. The Ancona orc warriors were in a frenzied state. Their strength increased by 50% compared to normal. Creighton chuckled as he watched his comrades defeat even 2 or 3 opponents at once. Heh heh heh. After the incident with the centaurs, I found a reason to practice my magic. While the fierce battle was raging both in the sky and on the ground at the villa, a magic sphere placed in the forest far from the villa allowed the mercenaries, Teleo's subordinates, to watch the entire battle. The mercenaries exclaimed in shock as they witnessed the Rowan orcs dying like flies. "Oh my god! The famous Rowan orcs from the islands are being pushed back! And by the Pendragon army, which was on the verge of collapse?" As the mercenaries were bewildered, a gloomy voice came from the one holding a centipede in his hand. "It's because of the enhancement spell." The soldiers flinched and glanced at the centipede in his hand. "Sir Golota?" Although he was one of the leaders of the warship mercenary team, Golota was a famous sorcerer in the south, specializing in spiritual magic and poisons. Golota said while munching on the centipede, "It seems he's not the only one there who can use magic. There's another magic user of the same level, but of course, how can they be as strong as me?" Golota cackled with an arrogant demeanor, a thick killing intent radiating from him. The mercenaries felt a chill as they looked at Golota's sinister smile. What a terrifying aura. Is this really the power of a sorcerer? The power to slaughter thousands of knights and mercenaries? Anyway, they are all just bait. Golota continued to observe the crystal ball, not paying any attention to the soldiers' fearful expressions. He even enjoyed it more when others were afraid of him. Golota licked his lips deliciously after finishing the centipede and told the soldiers, "While they are distracted fighting the pirate orcs, we will kidnap the White Worm's mother. It's too easy." Golota glanced at the soldiers who were sweating coldly. "That's the order that No, the Black King gave us." Golota reached out and caressed the crystal ball. "Now, let's see where she is." After a moment, the view in the ball moved, scanning through all the rooms of the villa. The image of Helen hugging Mia, cowering in a corner with Tata and Kale, came into the sorcerer's sight. As soon as she noticed the griffins approaching, Helen had led Mia, Tata, and Kale to hide in the cellar. Helen's pupils trembled while Mia, Tata, and Kale were also so scared they were on the verge of tears. They didn't even dare to cry for fear of being discovered by the enemy. Beside them were 2 maids, hugging their knees tightly to prevent their terrified screams from escaping. Tata shivered, huddling close to Helen. "Tata is scared. Tata doesn't want to die." Kale was also trembling, clinging to Helen's skirt, but tried to act brave, declaring, "Kale is not scared. I'm not a coward like you." Helen, though extremely anxious, tried to keep her voice calm to soothe everyone's trembling hearts. "That's right. There's nothing to be afraid of. The soldiers are outside fighting for us." Helen took a deep breath and tried to maintain a determined gaze, showing the courage of someone who had carried the Pendragon family through 10 years of decline. "I trust that they will protect us." Suddenly, a crimson flame erupted from the iron door in front of them. Everyone in the room bit their lips, not daring to make a sound. They stared at the door, being slowly corroded by the flames with extreme tension. The dark red flame slowly melted the iron door. The crackling sound of fire and the sizzling of molten metal dripping onto the floor mixed with Golota's gloomy incantation praising the god of calamity. Helen finally couldn't hide her panic. That metal door! A giant hole was punched through the iron door, enough for the people in the room to see Golota and the mercenaries standing outside, looking at them with murderous eyes. Golota retracted the hellfire in his hand and then beckoned to Helen with an arrogant smile.
Are you all right, Duchess? Tie yourself up and come with us. Everyone in the room shrank back, pressing against the wall behind them.
Golota continued in a threatening tone. If you resist, the trash next to you will melt just like that door. Kale and Tata whimpered with trembling voices. Tata doesn't want to turn into soup. It's so scary. Mia also clung tightly to Helen in fear. No matter how scared Helen was, she always remembered that she was the Duchess Pendragon. She reminded herself to be brave and stand up to protect everyone in the room. Without a word, Helen immediately stood up and walked towards the sorcerer with her head held high, resolute and proud. Helen asked Golota bluntly, her voice revealing no trace of fear. Is this all Governor Seyrod's order? Golota smiled slyly and extended his arm, wrapped in white bandages like a mummy's shroud, towards Helen. Don't say such useless things, otherwise I'll have to silence you.
As soon as Golota finished speaking, before Helen could react, the white cloth on his arm shot out and wrapped around her like a python squeezing its prey. It only took a few seconds for the cloth to bind Helen's entire body like a mummy, even gagging her mouth. Helen struggled in panic but couldn't escape. Her legs were bound, and she immediately lost her balance and fell to the ground with a thud. Everyone was worried for Helen but didn't know what to do against the powerful sorcerer. Golota, smugly triumphant, ordered the mercenaries, "Take her away!" A soldier eagerly replied, "Yes, Sir Golota." Helen helplessly wriggled on the ground like a worm trapped in a cocoon. She tried to make muffled groans to call for help, but the gag was too tight, so the only sounds that came out were intermittent, muffled noises. The mercenaries gleefully walked quickly towards Helen. "Great! We've easily kidnapped the Duchess! I didn't expect it to be this easy." The sorcerer is on a completely different level from ordinary people. Suddenly, a sound of wind being torn whistled past their ears, and a streak of blue light flashed. In a blink of an eye, a faint sound of something being cut from behind Golota made him jump and widen his eyes in shock. In that instant, the heads, bodies, and arms of all 4 mercenaries were silently severed. The human heads slid off their bodies and fell to the floor, their expressions still not registering their own deaths. Golota, confused, immediately turned to look at his comrades. Everyone else in the room was also horrified by the sight, but Helen did not seem afraid. Golota's body froze at this sudden slaughter. He couldn't move because of the terrifying pressure of a dragon's aura. Soldrake landed calmly, gently, and silently in front of him. Golota stared blankly at the wide white wings and the 3 sparkling jewels embedded in Soldrake's forehead. Then his gaze quickly moved down to her hands instead of her forehead. He trembled in fear when he discovered something long and slender growing from the tips of her sparkling fingers. It was a sword radiating a blue aura. Helen unhesitatingly strained towards Soldrake, trying to plead for help with all her might. Golota's jaw dropped in horror. The ones who were just killed didn't even bleed. Is that an aura blade? His white, bulging eye looked like it was about to pop out of its socket. Soldrake raised her cold, sharp eyes and stared at Golota. Her aura blade simultaneously created a more brilliant light than before. Golota's yellowed teeth chattered nonstop. I have killed countless humans before. Knights, nobles, even royalty. I always made them fear me. But now, I'm afraid. Helen, overjoyed to see Soldrake, tried to crawl towards her and let out muffled cries for help through the gag. Sol! Sol! Golota's eyes rolled back. He was scared, but it wasn't the fear of death. It was the primal fear that appears when one stands before a predator. When seeing an overwhelmingly superior existence, beyond all reason, the only thing Golota could move was his eyes. He darted his eyes at the surreal scene before him. On the ground were the headless bodies of the mercenaries, dead, but not a single drop of blood had fallen. He became even more terrified. Am I afraid of this worthless little thing in front of me? That woman. Golota stared at Soldrake, his fear drowning all his confidence and arrogance. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move, and instead of trying to change the situation with a spell, a grinding sound came from his mouth. She is clearly not human. The jewelry on her forehead, and the wings on her back. Special tools of an extraordinary magician can create weapons that radiate aura, but only one race has the ability to create blades of light with their bare hands. Golota no longer had any doubt about his speculation. In his mind, one sentence repeated over and over. Only one race can do that. Only it. And the image of a dragon filled his entire mind. Golota had the honor of seeing a dragon for the first time in his life after 40 years as a sorcerer. But as he tried to scream that it was a dragon, his head was severed while his mouth was still agape. Amidst helplessness and fear, Golota died. It was like the feeling of his victims when they faced his poison and mind control magic. Fear spread through the air as half of his head fell without a single drop of blood. Meanwhile, Raven's group was on their way back from Count Sayrod's mansion. Inside the carriage, there was only silence, and outside as well. Only the clatter of horse hooves and the wooden wheels turning on the ground could be heard. Ian was having his recovery enhanced by Raven's healing shield. Ingrid looked worriedly at Ian, who was leaning wearily against the seat.
"Are you all right, brother?" Ian replied tiredly. "I'm better. The healing magic of this shield is truly incredible." Once he felt his own wounds were better, Ian immediately turned his sharp, curious eyes towards Raven, who was sitting in the opposite seat. He asked Raven in a low voice, "But hey, what the hell is with your body?" Ian, full of curiosity, pointed straight at Raven's arm, which had been shattered during the fight, and unhesitatingly voiced his question. "That arm, now it looks healthy and strong, as if it had never been scratched, let alone had its bones broken." Not only Ian, but all the girls were also staring at Raven with curious eyes. Ian continued with a scrutinizing gaze. "Your arm was crushed by that monster's shield, but you were able to get up right after and continue fighting." Everyone anxiously awaited Raven's answer. For a moment, it made him flustered. It took Raven a few seconds to come up with a plausible reason.
"It's the power of the White Dragon." Ian clicked his tongue and looked away from Raven's arm soon after.
The White Dragon, huh? That's great. Ian had heard that from generation to generation. The Pendragon Dukes often manifested mysterious abilities and indescribable powers, so he had no reason to continue to wonder. But Luna's expression showed that she suspected Raven's convincing-sounding answer. Luna glanced at Raven while hiding her question in her heart. "Is that really so?" As the carriage continued to roll along the deserted road, only Luna in the carriage still harbored doubts. Not long ago, she had clearly seen Raven experience a similar situation: a broken arm, vomiting blood multiple times, a pale complexion, but then recovering quickly, and that had happened even before he set foot in the Ancona forest. But Luna chose to remain silent, as Raven's expression seemed unwilling to reveal anything more. Back at the Pendragon Villa, a few of the pirates' griffins, tattered but lucky to be alive, had fled the scene in fear. Killian, with a few minor scratches on his skin, stood with high spirits, pointing his sword at the bodies of the defeated army lying on the ground. "Ha ha ha! Look, we have completely annihilated the Roan Orc army!" Killian joyfully shouted praises of his side's victory. Along with him, the Ancona Orc warriors and the knights who had fought with all their might also cheered in celebration. "The Pendragon army is victorious! We won!" Even the Ancona griffins joined in the celebration with resounding cries like eagles. Only Kraton was too tired to shout. He chuckled weakly, having used all his energy to cast enhancement spells for the entire army. The griffins joyfully flew in circles in the sky above the villa. They held their heads high, proudly showing off their achievements to Soldrake, who was sitting nonchalantly on the second-floor railing. Although Soldrake did not respond, they knew she was praising them through her eyes. Having narrowly escaped danger, Helen calmed the people in the room and then slowly approached Soldrake. Helen hesitantly opened her mouth to speak to Soldrake, even though she knew communication was impossible. "Thank you." Helen stood awkwardly behind Soldrake, seeming to wait for a response from her, even though she knew she couldn't hear, or at least for a glance from her.